Hello and welcome to Capturing Christianity. My name is Cameron Bertuzzi. I'm exposing you to the intellectual side of Christian belief. Tonight we're talking about the fine-tuning argument for God's existence. I've got Dr. Luke Barnes here with me. Let me pull up my screen here. Dr. Luke Barnes, he's a cosmologist. He works out of, you're in Sydney, is that correct?
I'm
Australia.
indeed in Sydney, Australia.
Well, we're not going to take a whole lot of time. We want to get into, this is a Q&A. We're basically devoting most of this live stream to Q&A from you guys. So if you have a question for Dr. Barnes about the fine-tuning argument, write it in the live chat right now. We've already had one guy send in a super chat, so we'll get to that in a second. But what we're going to do at the outset of this video is Dr. Barnes. You mind if I call you Luke? You've been on the show many times.
Please do.
All right, Luke. So what we're going to do at the outset is we have some slides prepared, and basically what Luke is going to do is he's going to give us an overview of his version of the fine-tuning argument, what it is, what it says. He's got some slides prepared, and so we're going to run through that first. So if you have a question for him, feel free to put it in the live chat. I'm still going to be looking through there. But in the meantime, we are going to do this. We're going to go through and just give a kind of overview of the argument. If you want to learn more about Luke, then check the description of the video. I've linked to his blog, and you can find out more about him and his background. But we're going to kind of skip that for this so we can devote most of it to the content. So here we go. Let's pull up the slides, and we'll get started. Go ahead and take it away.
Excellent. So the book on the left is the book that I wrote with Geraint Lewis on the fine-tuning the universe for life, a fortunate universe. Just shameless promotion. We've got a new book out about the evidence for the Big Bang Theory, and if you want to overthrow that theory, what you have to do, called the Cosmic Revolutionary's Handbook. You can ask me about that if you feel like it. So there's a formulation of the argument that I like that actually came out of next slide, out of a blog post that I did for the Capturing Christianity blog. So
that's right.
Yep. That's not come up on my screen? Is that?
Oh, here we go.
Slide, yeah. Okay.
Sorry about that. I was looking at the comments. Someone said that my audio is a bit low. So let me know, guys, if it's just low for him or if it's low for everybody. So let me know in the live chat. All right, so let's get to the next slide. Here we go.
So the blog post on the left there, what you can't do with a multiverse, and that sort of turned into the paper, which is on the right, which is accepted for publication but not yet actually published. So if you want a copy of that, just send me an email or something, but hopefully that'll be out soon. Next slide. So the idea here is to start off with sort of the context into which, don't jump straight into fine-tuning. Let's just think about naturalism. Just think about the idea that the universe is all that there is, that physical stuff is the only stuff. So that's a sort of basic definition of naturalism. When you're thinking through any sort of idea, whether you're a scientist or not, you want to ask, okay, if that idea was true, what would I expect to see in the world around me? So this is what you do especially as a physicist. If Einstein's idea about gravity were correct, what would I expect to see when I look at the center of our galaxy, when I look close to the sun, when I look at the way Mercury orbits, all these sorts of things? What would I expect to see? And so naturalism shouldn't be immune from that. And so we should be asking about naturalism. Of all the possible ways that a physical universe could have been, is our universe what we would expect on naturalism? So this is kind of the big question. However, the big question is very, very big. So all the possible ways a physical universe could have been. I mean, if we think we can specify a physical universe, I'm a theoretical physicist, so I just write down the equations that describe a universe. That's kind of what I do for a living anyway. But all the possible ways would kind of be all the possible, mathematical equations that could describe a universe, including maths we haven't even discovered yet. So that's a bit of a problem. So there's two options here. Either we kind of abandon this question entirely, and I think that's a bad idea if you're a naturalist, because if we can't even get any sort of grasp on this question, then we can't make a case for naturalism, yet alone a case against it. And a lot of the standard arguments, like the argument from evil, I think this question is relevant for that as well. So I think it's a bad idea for us to abandon this question. So what we need to do is to try to get at this question in some way. We can't completely answer it, but we can have a go at it. So the idea is, well, we have the fundamental laws that describe our universe, and let's have a closer look at those. Okay, if we were trying to answer the big question, we'd have to consider all possible, equations at least. But we've got sort of a smaller. We can do it something smaller in there. If you look at the equation, there are these constants in there that we have to specify. And what if instead of trying to change the form of the equation, which is too hard and too big, what if we just change the constants and used that as a way of generating a large set of other possible ways the universe could have been, and we just investigate that? So that leads us to, next slide, the little question. Of all the possible ways that the fundamental constants of the standard models could have been, is our universe what we would expect on naturalism? So sort of pictorially, next slide, here's what's going on. We've got the thing we want to investigate, all possible naturalistic universes, but that's a great big set that we can't really get a handle on. We can't explore that territory. Next slide. We're in there somewhere, presumably, or at least, the natural part of our world is in there somewhere, not assuming naturalism is true. But here's what we can do. If we go to the next slide, we can take a subset of our laws, plus we just vary the constants, and we explore that terrain and see what that set of possibilities looks like. And so the reason why we go for the little question, in short, it's like the big question, but we can actually answer it. So next slide, here are some reasons why this is actually a reasonable approach. The little question has been addressed by physicists for the last 40 years, but not for the purposes of testing naturalism or promoting theism. It's nothing like that. We're just addressing a model. We're looking at the constants of nature. Secondly, we can calculate what the universe would be like with these different constants and initial conditions. We have the equations. We can do theoretical physics. And so we can actually, with some degree of certainty, know what things would be like with different constants. Whereas if you go to completely different equations, things, it's not a given that we know what would happen. It's systematic. We aren't just checking every possibility we can think of. We have a well-defined set of constants, well-defined set of ranges. We can go and look through all of them. It reflects the best rather than just infinitely postponing until physics is finished. I guess, actually, the way I've put it, you'd have to also finish mathematics as well if you're going to answer the big question in that way. It varies the only feasible degree of freedom in the fundamental equations as we have them. So if you look at the equations, you can either mess with the form of the equation, or you can mess with something in the equation, and the constants are sort of the only feasible way of doing this. The probabilities we need, I can explain this in more detail if people have questions, but the probabilities we need are also needed to test those theories in the first place. So we want to say something about what is likely and what is unlikely and map the terrain. We have to be able to do that within physics as it stands now, just to do ordinary physics. So, for example, if I want to know, given all the data I have, what's the probability that the electron mass has this value or this range of values? That's a distribution. In order to answer a question like that, I need a certain set of probabilities over these constants, and those are enough for what we're trying to do in this case with the fine-tuning argument to answer the little question. And if anything, it's biased in favor of finding universes like ours. We had the whole of that naturalistic possible naturalistic universes. We went to a subset, but it's a subset that we know contains our universe. So if anything, we're biased in favor of finding universes that are like ours, if anything. So why the little question? Next slide. In short, it looks like the big question. It hopefully is our best chance at a question that reflects the big question, but we can actually answer it. We can actually go after it. And so we've explained this in the book. Here's a little slice of that parameter space. If we go to the next slide, just very briefly. So I've done a video with Cameron before about fine-tuning.
The evidence for fine-tuning.
Yeah. So very quickly, here's an example I like. The basic bits that you're made out of are the up quark, the down quark, and the electron. Right? So those are the three Lego pieces that make up you. A basic property of those Lego pieces is how heavy are they? Right? What's their mass? And so we could map out, in this case, it's a three-dimensional little piece of that parameter space with, if you pick a point in this cube, you've picked the up quark, down quark, and electron masses. So you are here, and it's a logarithmic scale, and we can define the top as being the Planck mass, where our theories sort of run out. So there's a limit there. And so what we can now do is to say, all right, what would things be like in other bits of this parameter space? We have the equations, we can change the numbers, we can go and ask this question. And so next slide. So for example, if you want, we cut out that sort of back little slice there, because if you're in that part of the slice, then the basic bits of the universe basically don't stick together. So you can stick up and down quarks together to make one type of slightly bigger particle, a hadron, and that's it. No periodic table, no complexity, no information carrying anything in the universe. Stuff will not stick to other stuff. And next slide, as we go on and think about other criteria, we want them. We want basically to have a periodic table, and we want stars. And so you end up in this little slice, and the next one actually not. You actually have to be an even smaller slice than that. Next slide. You have to be in this little tiny space in order to have a universe in which you have stable forms of energy in the universe, like stars, and stable things like the periodic table. Anything that can build complexity. And so, next slide. So Geraint an atheist, by the way. So all the science of this is still being actively looked at, but it's not something where it was just made up by theists. So the first 6 chapters of this book are just an atheist and a Christian both talking about what happens if you change the laws of nature. And so the short answer is, if we go to the next slide, the answer to the little question, of all the possible ways that the fundamental constants of the standard models could have been, is our universe what we would expect on naturalism? The answer is a pretty firm no. That's the answer to fine tuning. And so the best handle we have on the big question of whether naturalism generates the right expectations for the universe we see, the answer is no. Very quickly, just to finish, a common objection. This approach, big question, casts on some common objections. So if we go to the next one, the multiverse is the objection that, these constants, maybe they vary in other parts of the universe. Maybe if I go far enough in that direction, I'll find another bit of the universe with different values of the electron mass and the up quark mass and all of that sort of stuff. So maybe we just sort of won the cosmic lottery. Within this context, keeping in mind that we're trying to get the best handle we can on the big question, can I use multiverse theories to get to formulate the little question better? It's not going to get us to the big question, but can I get a little question 2.0, a better little question which explores a bit more of the possibilities? And the answer to that is, at this point in time, no. I mean, I've written papers on. No, it's fine. The best theories of the multiverse we have are still kind of toy models. So I've written papers on the multiverse. Some collaborators and I have spent hundreds of thousands of computing hours trying to simulate what would happen in other parts of the multiverse. So this is something we can investigate them, but can I actually formulate? Is there a landscape of multiverse models where I can get a handle on the whole landscape in the way I can with the constants? The answer is just no. So in light of that, that tells us what this objection really is. If we go to the next slide, remember, here's our map of what we're trying to do here. If you add the multiverse in, if you go to the next slide, what we're trying to do is expand out the part of the whole that we can investigate. We won't just look at our laws plus varied constants. We'll look at new laws of nature that hopefully make a multiverse, and then look at that landscape. And so that tells us what this objection really is. It wants a rematch. Okay, the real arena is the blue arena there, but we can't get a handle on the whole terrain there, and so we look at the feasible arena of the yellow one, our laws plus varied constants, and that went really badly for naturalism. So maybe we can expand the arena out, and hopefully things go a bit better in the red arena. But the answer to that is we just don't know what happens in the whole red arena. We have examples, like points out in the red bit that are examples of multiverses, but no idea about what the terrain is. Finally, last slide, if we go to the next one, there's a really great test of any objection to the fine-tuning argument. I've called it the awesome theological argument. That's my name, but it's not my approach. It goes back at least to John Leslie's wonderful book, Universes. So the idea is this: suppose tomorrow, in every language that currently, that can be written down on Earth, in various parts of the sky, the first 14 verses of the Gospel of John turn up. Right, so it turns up in English and in Greek and in every language, and that turns up. That seems like it would be pretty good, written in the stars. That seems like it would be pretty good evidence for God. And so the thing to do with your objection to the fine-tuning argument is try it out against that scenario and see what happens. So it seems like in that case we would have an awesome theological argument, right? Now, we don't know all the possible naturalistic universes, but we're pretty sure of all the universes in which there are stars in the sky, the set in which it spells out the first 14 verses of John in every language is a very small subset, and so that's a problem for naturalism. So this argument from the first 14 verses of John has the same form as the fine-tuning argument, and so we can just throw your objection at that argument and see how it looks, and then try and throw it at fine-tuning. So that's my intro.
The name of that awesome theological argument, how is that related? Because it sounds like you're just saying if you can't, if your theory of the multiverse can't account for this design inference, then your multiverse theory is a really bad one. Where's the connection between that and the awesome theological argument? Where did you get that name from?
Oh, yeah, I made that name up.
Okay.
But it's basically, there's some really interesting papers by John Hawthorne and his last name's Isaacs. People can look it up. Fine-tuning, and misapprehensions about the fine-tuning argument. They push this one quite nicely. I just wanted a nice name for it. But so the idea is not that this is an answer to the multiverse objection, but just that you've got through the fine-tuning argument. Any objection you've got, throw it at the awesome theological argument and just see what happens. Just to get some instinct about what's going on here. In short, if that actually happened, there'd better not be any good objections to the awesome theological argument, right? If those 14 verses really did turn up in every language, that would be good evidence. And so there'd better not be any objections to it.
Okay, well, let's go to questions. I mean, like we said, what we wanted to do at the outset was to just give a kind of overview of what Luke's view on the fine-tuning argument is, and I think it's a very interesting take, and I don't know that you're going to see that from really anyone else. I mean, if you think about William Lane Craig's version of the fine-tuning argument, it doesn't look anything like that, and same with Robin Collins. Robin Collins uses a probability approach. I mean, ultimately, I think you're going to get down, if once we write it out, it's going to be kind of the same thing. But I wanted to take some time at the beginning of this and just sort of spell out what your view is, and that way we can, as we're addressing the questions, as you're answering them, we can just keep that in mind as some context here. Well, let's get to the first question. The first question, this is a super chat from Jonathan Becker. Thanks for your super chat, Jonathan. He says, can you discuss observer selection effects? Do they undermine our ability to make likelihood arguments? As Edward Sobel argues.
So actually, I think Sober's slightly changed his mind about this. So here's the short story. The thought is, I think the way Sober puts it is we have certain blind spots. There are things that could be true, but I can't believe them about myself. So his example here for the fine-tuning argument is, it couldn't possibly be the case that I live in a universe which doesn't permit my existence. And so if there were any, this is an observer selection effect, any universe which is observed is a universe which permits the existence of observers. So observer selection effects are very common in astronomy and in all the sciences, really. You have a population you want to investigate, but you can't get all of that population, and so you sample a subset of that population, and then you have to worry about, does the sample reflect the whole population? So elections are the classic example. I want to know how everyone's going to vote, but I can't just ask everyone, 2 weeks before the election. And so I'll go and sample 1,000 people at my local mall or something. You have to worry about whether that sample reflects the overall population.
Whether it's representative.
Yeah. And so the thought is, when you have an observer selection effect in terms of your existence, of course, my existence kind of selects a sample out of the possible universes, which permits my existence. If that's a trivial, that seems to be trivial. And so what's the point here? I think the best answer to this is just, and I think Sober actually has changed his mind on this. If you ask the question, why is there a life-permitting universe at all, then it becomes clear that actually the selection effect doesn't answer that. Given that there is a life-permitting universe, why do I observe that I'm in that life-permitting universe? That's a selection effect. But there's the fact. So here's an example from the book. There are objects in the very distant universe called quasars, which are extremely bright. And if they weren't very bright, then we wouldn't see them. But if you're asking the question, why are there quasars at all? The answer is not, because why do I observe quasars at all? The answer is not because, sorry, hang on. Got to get this right. If you're asking the question, why are quasars bright? The answer is not because otherwise I wouldn't see them. Okay, so if you're asking the question, why is there a life-being universe at all? The answer can't be something like, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. But that seems to get the explanation wrong.
It doesn't answer the right question.
Yeah. It does answer our question, but not the big question.
All right, so here's a question from Mind Onion. He says, as an experimental physics doctoral student myself, my question is, what experiment could be conducted that could show that a variable is not fine-tuned?
Excellent. Enjoy your doctoral studies. So remember the context of the argument. We are trying to get a handle on other ways the universe could have been, because that's what we have to do in order to ask a question like, is naturalism generating the right expectations? And so you do this when you test any physical theory. You have to worry about other ways the universe could have been. And so it's not an experiment. The way that you would show that a variable is not fine-tuned is using theoretical physics. Okay? It has actually been the case. So I wrote a paper in 2015 about what's called the diproton disaster. So there had been some previous arguments saying that if you had a universe in which a proton could stick to a proton, okay, in our universe that doesn't happen. They would just fall apart. Quantum mechanically, there's too much energy in in that system for them to stay stuck together, and so there's enough energy for them to fall apart. So they do. If you change the laws of nature a little bit, you can stick them together. There was an argument actually going back to Freeman Dyson in the 1970s, which said if we had a universe in which that was possible, in which that was the case, in which protons stuck together, then stars would be explosive and they would all just burn through all their fuel in a couple of seconds, and so you wouldn't have, that would be a pretty dangerous universe. The way that my paper actually shows that that's not the case, okay? And the way you do that is theoretically actually asking, what would happen in a universe in which the diproton was bound, in which you can stick two protons together? And the answer is that basically stars won't get into the situation in which they explode. You just have a slightly larger, puffier, less dense, less hot stars, and they will still burn appropriately slowly. So remembering the context of all the possibilities, here's the possibilities we can actually get a handle of, and it looks like life-permitting universe are extremely small subset of the sort of yellow circle, the circle we can get a handle on. The way we could be wrong about that is that there's other parts of the space there that we thought couldn't sustain life, but actually they can. So that has happened a couple of times, but in other times, you know, we thought a part of parameter space was okay, and it turned out not to be okay. So it does go both ways.
Okay, so I have another question here about God, and I just lost it. Well, here I think I got it here. All right, from Woe Beats. He says, how can we calculate God as the possibility, though?
So the equivalent question to ask is, so the big question for theism would be, of all the, you know, if we're just thinking about the physical universe, of all the possible physical universes that could have existed on theism, is ours what we would expect? And if we're in the context of the fine-tuning argument, we have to keep the rules the same. This is the Bayesian, you've got to keep the evidence the same. We would have to do the equivalent of the little question for theism, which would be of all the ways the constants of the standard models could be, is our universe what we would expect on theism? And so that's just a question we have to ask. And the idea of,
I think it'd be worth to talk about like some of the reasons, some of the arguments that you've given in favor of, you know, positive answer to that.
Yeah, so actually Richard Swinburne's particularly good on this. His book, The Existence of God, goes in this in great detail. The short story is, if there's a God who does things for certain reasons, then the approach I actually take in the paper is just, okay, what could a reason for the universe be? No, we don't have to know the reason for the universe. It's not. We're not assuming there's just one. We're not assuming we're the reason. But, you know, a God who is personal and moral, which is the idea of God that at least Christians have. So there would be, a universe which achieves certain moral things, and in particular might have moral agents in it who are capable of performing morally significant actions. If that's a possible reason for the universe, that completely changes the way that we look at the probabilities of the sort of the set of universes that we have. Most of those universes, nothing moral will good or bad. It'll just be you'll just have a universe which protons occasionally bump into each other, and that's all that ever happens. There's no moral decision making that ever happens or ever could happen. And so anyway, so the point is we're not really calculating the probability of God in any sort of strict sense, but on the sort of the things that everyone who believes in God has sort of believed about God since before the fine-tuning argument. It seems that it's more likely, or at least as likely, or at least some, not one in a squazillion unlikely, that God would make a universe which permitted life and moral agents. Again,
squazillion.
Squazillion, that's a technical term. Again, take this objection and throw it at the awesome theological argument, right? What's the probability that God would make a universe in which the stars lined up to spell out the first 14 verses of John? Now, we might not be able to get a precise handle on that, but there's no way that question ruins the awesome theological argument, right? It's just, pick any reasonable number. The argument's still going to work fine. Uncertainties like that certainly shouldn't derail that kind of the awesome theological argument, and so it's entirely reasonable that they won't derail the fine-tuning argument either.
All right, so here's a really good question from Jonathan Becker. Another question from him. He says, seems like there's no valid probability measure for the big question, while there is for the little question. Some say this makes the little question too convenient. What are your thoughts?
Some say. The worry there is not whether it's convenient or not. I mean, we go for the biggest feasible question we can manage. right? The big question is too big. And so, like, if you've got another approach here, which is not my little question, if you've got a bigger little question that you think can attack the big question, then I'm all ears. Go for it. Plausibly, if you're not varying the form of the equation of the fundamental equation laws of nature as we know them, then the only thing left is the constants. And so there really is a very small set of things we could go with. Too convenient. The problem here is the real worry here is whether it's biased in favor of theism over naturalism. And as I said in my reasons for the little question, if anything, it should be biased in favor of naturalism, just thinking a priori, because if we're going to start worrying about what universes can permit life, and we want to investigate the whole space, okay, what's the sort of smaller feasible arena we go for? We've gone for an arena in which we know that our universe exists. We've gone for a smaller arena, a smaller question in which we know that our universe is. So we know that in that arena there is already an example of a life-permitting universe. So this is a bit like if I want to go looking for there's an example we used in the book. I think we said if you want to go looking for bears in the forest, you might have said mushrooms, whatever, bears. If you want to go looking for bears in a forest, I'm in Australia. If you want to go looking for koalas in the bush, if you start somewhere where you know there was a koala yesterday, right, then you're not looking at some random bit of the bush. You're looking at somewhere where, if anything, your search is biased in favor of finding more koalas. They're not bears, by the way. It's not a koala bear. So if it is convenient, but it's the largest answerable question we've got, and it's not too convenient in the sense of being biased on those grounds that, if anything, we've biased ourselves in favor of finding more life-permitting universes.
All right, here's a question from CCMNXC, and this is a two-parter. And we just got a super chat, so we'll get to that in a second. So CCMNXC, this is a two-parter. In reviewing your book, A Fortunate Universe, Professor Jan Benetreux Dupin at the University of Pittsburgh at NDPR cites Ehrman and Mosterin in 1999 and McCoy 2015 as people who, here's part two, dispute whether or not fine-tuning is even a problem. So one, are you familiar with these works and their position that fine-tuning is not a problem? And two, if so, where do they go wrong? Seems like a pretty technical question.
Yeah, so I remember reading they're referring to the review of the book that was in the Notre Dame Philosophical Reviews, I think. I think I've read the Ehrman one, but I don't remember specifically what it said. I don't think I've read the other one. I've tried to keep up on fine-tuning in the philosophy literature as well. Sorry, I don't remember exactly what their objection was. I try to collect objections for the fine-tuning argument just for fun. And so I'm probably familiar with what the objection, I just don't remember what those exact paper was. If you want to try and summarize what they said, I'm happy to go for that. But I don't want to guess what they said because then I might be misrepresenting them.
All right, here is the next question. This is a super chat from True Counterphobia. Thank you for your super chat. He says, unpack fine-tuning of John 1 through 14.
Oh,
so just explain what the argument is again.
So suppose it's the case that we wake up tomorrow and let's create a totally fantastic scenario, and the stars overnight have rearranged, and so that everyone waking up when no, that doesn't work, does it? So suppose when everyone goes out tonight and looks up at the stars, they can see in whatever language that they speak that the stars have rearranged themselves to write out the first 14 verses of John, right? So I look up at 8 o'clock tonight, and there's, in the beginning was the word was with the blah, 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 and off we go, the first 14 verses of John. And, in France, they look up and it's there in French and all of that. Okay, suppose all that's true. It seems like that would be a pretty good argument for God. Not a knockdown argument. I suppose you could believe there were aliens just trying to mess with us, but it seems like that would be pretty good. It might at least, Twitter atheists might stop going, where's the evidence? Thanks. So the form of the argument that if you wanted to formalize that, I mean, intuitively, I think most people would go, all right, God exists, we're done. If you want to formalize it, you might say, okay, look, if naturalism were true, we would not expect that the first 14 verses of John would turn up in the night sky. However, if theism is true, maybe we wouldn't expect it. We certainly wouldn't expect it to the degree that it's a problem for naturalism. There's some level of expectation where that might happen. God might decide to do that, and so in this case, the pattern in the stars is strong evidence for theism over naturalism.
Here's something that I think.
Let me just finish one thought.
Go for it.
If you wanted to really make the parallel to the fine-tuning argument clear, you could say, all right, I can't get a handle on all the possible naturalistic universes. Of course, there are some in there where the stars line up just to do this. But if I at least think of a subset, say, of all the naturalistic universes where there's a night sky where the stars just appear according to ordinary natural laws, there's an extremely small subset in which they spell out the first 14 verses of John. In that sense, it's a fine-tuned outcome if you're a naturalist, and thus a very unlikely outcome if you're a naturalist, and thus, evidence for theism. So the point is, if you understand why that would be good evidence for God if it existed, you at least understand the logic of the fine-tuning argument. In this case, it's not the first 14 verses of John, it's the fact that our universe permits life. And then just throw your objection at both of those arguments at the same time to see what happens.
All right, so I think this will just be a helpful point in understanding probability theory. We did an interview with Nevin Clemenhaga on probability theory. If you guys want to see more about this, and I don't even know if we talked about this in particular, but I've seen this. It comes up a lot, and I think it kind of hides behind the scenes. It's not something that's made explicit, and so maybe it'd be helpful to just talk about it for a second. So when we're thinking about the fine-tuning argument, the first premise of Robin Collins' argument is that the probability of a life-permitting universe is, given naturalism, is very, very low. That's premise one of his argument. Premise two is it's not the case that the probability of a life-permitting universe given theism is very low. And so all this requires is that the probability of a life-permitting universe given theism is just slightly higher than the probability of a life-permitting universe is on naturalism. So if we're thinking about going back to the data, the awesome theological argument, John 1, 1 through 14, written out in the scars, let's say that's our data. That is very, very unlikely, and we should be more hyperbolic with that. So it's very, 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 very unlikely, given naturalism, that would happen, that it would just spell out that in the stars. But suppose that it's very, very unlikely that this would happen given theism. That's still going to be very strong evidence for theism over naturalism, even though on theism it's still pretty unlikely.
Yeah.
But I think that we don't understand that. People that are approaching these situations, like, instead of thinking like, okay, on one side of the equation or under one hypothesis, this data is really unlikely, but we don't have evidence for a different hypothesis unless it's very probable on that other hypothesis. But that's not how probability theory works.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a set of objections to the fine-tuning argument, actually by Neil Manson's wrote an interesting paper on this. Just whether the atheist can say, the skeptic can say, look, we just have no idea what the probability of a life-permitting universe given theism is. So that's the argument done. Now, if that were true, that is actually correct. That's if you don't have a handle on that probability, it's done. But
I disagree with that. Maybe we can talk about that for a
well,
second.
in terms of the formulation of that, if you're relying on a likelihood principle, it can still have intuitive force. But even then, a lot of the quotes that he produces from people who have, so Sober says, Graham Oppin says, it's not clear to me that there is very much one can conclude about the kind of universe that a designer is likely to produce. It's not clear to me that there's much you can say about. That's not enough, right? It's entirely consistent with the awesome theological argument to say, look, it's not clear what verses God would write on the sky if there were, if God decided to write on the sky, or whether he would write on the sky at all. That's fine. All that means is that the probability of God writing on the sky is low. That's all right. It's just not anywhere near as low as the probability of it happening naturalistically. That's all the argument needs.
All right, here's another one from Jamie UR. If the fine-tuning does not require a designer, what could be the other explanation? Chance, multiverse, or anything else?
So the question is whether the universe needs a designer. So I just want to be clear about that. But whether fine-tuning implies a designer, I suppose. The other explanations are you can say just chance. So ultimately, or the sort of equivalent of chance, I suppose. If you're a naturalist and there just is a way the universe is, and there could have been other mathematically consistent ways the universe could have been, but it just isn't, and there's nothing else that can be said about that. When it comes to actually testing that idea, it has the same sort of structure, or it is approached in the same way by probability theory as if it was just chance. Right? It is not the same as saying that there is some random universe generator. That's not the same. But in terms of Bayesian probabilities, that interview with Nevin's really good. Go and listen to that. In terms of Bayesian degrees of support, degrees of expectation, degrees of credence, however you want to flesh that out, a theory like that just gets treated the same way as chance. And so that's one option. The problem is you can't just say that the universe is like this, that's all there is to it. You have to actually say, okay, you have to still ask the question, is this the universe we would expect? And so the best handle we have on that tells us that no, this is not. That's the whole point of the fine-tuning argument. As again, the multiverse, if we lay out the argument in this way, it's clear that multiverses, like physically, I'm writing papers on them. I'm investigating, I'm doing simulations, like fine, let's go look at multiverse ideas. The question is whether those give us any hand and the little question that we have.
Repeat that last sentence. You broke up a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. The question is whether multiverse theories can give us a better handle on the big question than the current little question that I've proposed, which is just you vary the constants in the laws of nature that we have. Now, I would say the answer to that is no. But if someone wants to go and do that calculation, and it's got to be a calculation, get your computer out and go for it. Show me what you're doing. In the context of this argument, you can't just say there might be a multiverse. You have to say, look, we lost that other, match, but there's a rematch in a bigger arena that I can actually do, and we win that one, so we're okay, right? Until you've got that, these are just mere possibilities. All right. Anything else? I suppose you could say that there were, deeper laws of physics, but that goes exactly the same way as the multiverse. Like, of course, again, throw this at the awesome theological argument. Maybe there's some deeper law of physics which says that on the 7th of May, 2020, these stars will line up as the first 14 verses of the John. Sure, possible. I don't care. Like, that should not affect that argument, and so it shouldn't affect the fine-tuning argument either.
All right, so here we go. Cool Blaze, let me put it back up here. Cool Blaze says, can you go over Boltzmann brains?
Boltzmann brains. All right, here we go.
Do it in 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds. entirely in hand motions. So when you've got a physical theory, especially in cosmology, you're sort of making an entire universe in mathematics. So when we write down the equations of the expansion of the universe, the Friedmann equations, they're great fun. We're sort of creating an entire universe there that we can then investigate, and it's it's kind of an axiom of science that you have to investigate all of the predictions of your theory, not just the ones that you like. And so when you're thinking about cosmology, the worry we always have in cosmology is that we are always inside the system that we are trying to investigate and model. Okay, so if you're a particle physicist working at the Large Hadron Collider, there's the collider and it's got the protons going around in it, but you're outside the system, right? That's the system over there, and I'm standing over here. But in cosmology, I'm inside the thing I'm trying to investigate. So if you want to ask a question like, okay, if my idea about the universe was correct, what would I expect to see? What would an observer expect to see? It's relevant where in your model of the universe, where are the observers? Where do the observers turn up? Okay, so I'm not just objectively standing outside looking at my apparatus. I'm in the universe in my theory. And so you have to ask the question, where does your idea about the universe, where does your theory of the universe actually make observers to then observe, to then have expectations about what they might see? The worry is in certain physical theories, you won't only get observers like us, which develop biologically over, you have a consistent history of the universe, and we have memories of the past, and we have an arrow of time, and the whole thing sort of fits together nicely. And in particular, the memories I have in my head, the physical state, was actually caused by the thing that those memories represent. So I remember yesterday having a sandwich for lunch. The reason that memory is in my head is because it actually happened that yesterday I had a sandwich for lunch. Okay, we call that, you can call that a sort of normal observer, an observer who actually saw stuff and remembered it. In certain cosmological theories, there will be observers for whom that is not true. You will have brains that exist where there will be the memory of yesterday's sandwich, but there was no sandwich yesterday. Okay. They have false memories. So these are called, I seem to have frozen again. These are called Boltzmann brains. So you have observers in the universe who have experiences, whatever the physical, correlate of an experience is, but they don't represent the actual universe. The worry then is, okay, let's look at all the things in your model of the universe that have a memory of the sandwich yesterday. If it's the case that, okay, there's one person, me, the real me, who has that memory because they actually had the sandwich, but then because the universe can just sort of churn out these other weird observers, there's 10 million observers who have the memory but didn't have the sandwich, then you've got a massive problem with your model, because it predicts that most observers in the model are wrong about what they observe about the universe. It loops back on itself and shoots itself in the foot. This is the Boltzmann brain problem. If you allow a universe which can create observers kind of in a snap out of chaos, out of a fluctuation, to have some brain state that doesn't actually reflect the real universe, then your theory sort of shoots itself in the foot. So that's the Boltzmann brain problem, and it's turned up in a number of. It's sort of something we discovered in some theories we had. We thought that these theories were all right, that they were going well, but actually it turned out that they allowed the existence of large numbers of freak Boltzmann brain observers, and so the theories then sort of, shot themselves in the foot and died. That's the Boltzmann brain problem.
I was listening to a lecture by Robin Collins on fine tuning, and he gave a good analogy that was really helpful to me in trying to wrap my mind around this. He gave the monkey type, the monkeys on the typewriter analogy. Have you heard that one?
Probably. Go for it.
For the Boltzmann Brain problem. Well, basically, what he said, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, he was saying, so imagine that we had a bunch of monkeys and we set them up on typewriters and we just like let them go at it, just like start typing anything you want. How often would it be that you'd get one of these monkeys to type out a word? Every now and then they would like type a word out every now and then. How often would it be that they would type out a whole sentence? That would be a whole lot less probable. I mean, that would not happen very often. How often would they write out Hamlet in one go? That's pretty unlikely. So what's more likely is that you're going to get little pockets of order, essentially. So you're going to get like you're going to get a word here and there. Like that's more along the lines of what you're going to see. And so with the Boltzmann brain, a Boltzmann brain would be like a pocket of order.
Yeah.
In the universe, whereas with our universe, that'd be like getting Hamlet.
Yeah, basically
like
that's
go.
it. Yeah. So it's called a Boltzmann brain because Ludwig Boltzmann, great 19th, 20th century scientist, proposed that, why do we see order around us? Well, maybe the whole universe as a whole is chaos, but every now and then a pocket of order will spontaneously come together just by chance. Mm-hmm. And then we have to observe that we're in one of those because we can't be there in the sort of general chaos thermal equilibrium that's in the universe. But as you say, smaller pockets are much more likely than larger pockets. And a brain which has a memory of a sandwich is a smaller pocket than a brain that has a memory of a sandwich because it actually ate the sandwich.
Embedded in a universe with all of these constants and
bingo.
Everything else. Okay, let me pull up the next question. Oh, this one's a really good one, and you'll have a lot to say on this. It's another question from CCMNXC, and we didn't really get to answer his last one. So he says, how do you respond to the McGrew's challenge that one can't properly formulate the probabilities given theoretically infinite options the values of constants could take? So this is the normalization problem.
Yeah. This is one of the reasons why I like this particular formulation of the argument. So it's dealing with objections by the McGrews. There's a similar paper that has some similar objections by, oh my goodness, I forgot the name. I'll find it in a second. Basically, there's all sorts of worries about probabilities. Also, talking to guys like
is it Vestrup?
No, Vestrup's the other. He's at the university.
He's the co-author with McGrew.
But there's another paper entirely that deals with things. Anyway, I'll find it in a second. One of the reasons I particularly like, Mark Collivan, who's at the University of Sydney, and Garfield and Priest, 2005, made some similar objections. Also talking with guys like David Albert, Tim Maudlin, Barry Lower. There's just a bunch of the. I've ended up the same place trying to defend the argument against those guys who are extremely smart and have given some. So they've given some good objections. This is the reason I like this particular formulation is we're deliberately finding an arena in which we can ask the probability questions, and then asking whether that's a reasonable arena to ask the question, right? So I'm not denying that we can't answer the big question. We can't answer it. It's too big. But within the constants of nature, just varying those constants in the standard models, we can generate a set of possibilities that is feasible to handle. In particular, the probabilities we need are exactly the same probabilities we need to test these theories in the first place. They have to be generated by the theory, not just purely, mathematical background information, but the theory itself has to have sort of, in some sense, some sort of control, some sort of handle over its own free parameters. If you want to do anything, so the problem with this objection that I have is probability of a life-emitting universe given certain theory about the universe. Okay, if I can't answer that because I can't get a handle on the parameters, on the constants in the theory, the problem is not that I can't calculate the probability of a life-emitting universe. I can't calculate the probability of anything with the theory. This objection, if it was successful, means I couldn't use general relativity and quantum field theory and the standard models of particle physics and cosmology to calculate the probability of anything at all. So the objection must be too strong. So the answer, I've actually got two papers on this, the paper I just showed and a previous one which is already published in the Journal of the European Philosophy of Science, European Journal for Philosophy of Science. The way we deal with this is that the theories themselves, because we can't stitch general relativity and the standard model of particle physics together, this is the famous, we don't have a theory of quantum gravity. Okay, what that means is there's a limit to the range of the constant, which is implied by the sort of limits of those theories. So the theories themselves give us a cutoff of that infinite range in the cases of the constants that have units. So specifically, sorry to get into details, the cosmological constant and the Higgs vacuum expectation value, just to be boring. The theories themselves give us that cutoff, which is exactly what we need to test the theories and for the fine-tuning argument. For if there's other cases that I sort of deal with there as well. But the short story is, yes, we can't deal with too big a space, but the argument is precisely based on the fact that we have an arena here in which we can ask the question we need to ask about naturalism. And if I can't get probabilities in that arena, then I can't get them in physics, not just in fine-tuning.
I was going to follow up with that, but let's move on. So here's another question. What fine-tuning case, Dr. Barnes, do you think is true but hasn't been discussed in the literature yet? It's an interesting question.
If it was one of those, I'd have published a paper on it. Let me answer a very related question. The one that I suspect is true but we can't quite get a handle on yet has to do with the balance of matter and antimatter in our universe. So when you go to a particle accelerator and you generate particles, we find that matter and antimatter, for every particle there's its antiparticle. We know about electrons, we just got a proton. So for every particle in the standard model, there is also an antiparticle, which has almost exactly the same properties except the opposite charge. So it's negatively charged if the other one is positively charged, and vice versa. In our universe, there is a massive overbalance of particles and not antiparticles. So there are loads of electrons, there are very few positrons, there are loads of up quarks, there are very few anti-up quarks. So best as we can tell from all our observations. Why is that the case? Well, it's assumed that there's some process in the early universe called baryogenesis, or baryogenesis, depending on who you ask. And we have some ideas about how that might work to sort of generate this imbalance. We've known since the 60s sort of a set of necessary conditions for that called the Sakharov conditions. But we don't yet have a successful theory. Now, what you don't want to do is jump in here and say, hey, I've got a fine-tuning case. Because if you remember, the way we formulated the argument was we're only going to use, solid, grounded, well-tested, standard models, physics that has reached the level where we call it now the standard model. So there is no theory of baryogenesis which reaches that level yet. However, I have my suspicions that once we get one of those theories, it will look very fine-tuned. In particular, we haven't got a theory where I can put in some fundamental constants of nature and out comes the imbalance in the universe that we have. Or, if you like, we sort of have some theories that might work and we're not totally sure which one of them is correct, if any of them are correct. So that's a case where I'm pretty sure the matter-antimatter balance in the universe is going to be a case of fine-tuning once we've worked out what makes it. But in the absence of a theory, I can't prove it. So it's just my suspicion.
All right, question from Chow. He says, what do you think of arguments from people like Sean Carroll who oppose fine-tuning, stating that we are not in a place to judge if on another universe life would be possible?
Sean's got some thoughtful objections to fine-tuning, I should say that. So they're worth taking seriously. He is right in that what I can't provide is a set of necessary conditions and sufficient conditions where if this universe has these conditions, then it will definitely have life. But I actually don't need those for the argument. What I need is a set of sufficient conditions for there not to be life. That's enough. If I map out my terrain, all I'm interested in is where are the life-emitting universes versus the non-life-emitting universes, and if I can take all the edge cases and say, all right, let's just say those are all, let's just make whatever conservative. Let's say they're all life-permitting. Okay. If there's any doubt, we'll just say it's life-permitting. In that case, the edge cases, the hard cases, the grey areas, I can just assign all of those to be life-permitting. Fine. That works against the fine-tuning argument, if anything. All I need to have a good map of is where are the bits of parameter space that are not life-permitting. And all I need there is sufficient conditions. There are really, all I need is really clear cases, and I think I've got those, and I don't think Sean denies that. So the cosmological constant, for example, if it's too large, then you have a universe in which there are just no particles that ever touch any other particles in the history of the universe. Every particle is surrounded by just empty space. Nothing ever happens. The reason why working out where exactly life would form is because life is a complicated thing, right? Ask anyone who's trying to work out how life formed in this universe in the first place, right? So it's really hard. But the reason why we can have a pretty good idea that life won't form in those universes is because nothing complicated happens in those universes. They're entirely simple, okay? So universes in which there's only one type of fundamental particle, or I showed the parameter spaces and carving them off before. It's easy to find universes where the periodic table would only consist of an element which is chemically identical to helium. That's it. That's all you get. You can't make any of the other things in the periodic table. Basically, the only charge of twice the charge of. I think we'll pause there.
Repeat that last.
So the only nucleus you can make is one where the nucleus has twice the charge of the electron. So the only thing you can make is basically identical to helium. I would say that's a sufficient condition to say if that's all you've got in a universe, you literally cannot stick anything to anything else. You can't write any code. You can't write, there's nothing. You can't make a self-replicating thing out of just stuff that won't stick together. In that case, that's a sufficient condition to say that there will not be life in that universe, and that's all I need. So it's not the case. Sean's quite right that there are edge cases where it will be difficult to tell, but there's enough clear cases for me to make the argument.
Yeah, I like that. I'm on board with that. All right, Adam does SE. Couldn't a creator god have tuned a universe which allows life using many combinations of constants? Doesn't this make fine-tuning less remarkable and improbable?
Right, classic. Let's throw this at the awesome theological argument, right? Couldn't he have written out part of the Gospel of Matthew? Couldn't he have written out the first 18 verses of John? That would be more impressive, wouldn't it, than just the first 14 verses? I mean, the short answer to this is that worries like this don't affect the argument, right? As long as naturalism's predicament is completely hopeless, these are not completely hopeless questions to ask a theist. They're just, fine. In particular, there's no assumption here about, there's an objection that goes something along the lines of, why does God create a fine-tuned universe in the first place? Why not just create a universe in which life is easy to form, or whatever? Why not just make a universe in which life can happen regardless of the parameters? In the context of the way I formulated the argument, that's a reasonable question, but it doesn't actually affect the argument, because the whole point was we found an arena in which we can answer these questions. So the question is, given these constants, is it, in this arena, is it likely that God would create a universe with these constants? So all of that, in order to answer those questions, I'd have to have some idea about what is outside the arena, other laws of nature that God could have used to create. But once we get onto other laws, we're out in there be dragons, no man's land, where we can't get any sort of handle on this question. So it's a reasonable question. It just doesn't affect the argument. In particular, there's something a little bit odd about the picture here. So this is actually one of Sean Carroll's made this objection as well. Why can't God just create life in any old universe, right? And so it's not, if theism is true, then it's not the case that there are life permitting and life prohibiting universes. God could just stick life in any old universe. The problem with that is, and actually I think, as I said before, Richard Swinburne's really good on this. That would create a really weird universe, which would sort of undermine the reason for the universe as being to create moral beings, moral agents in it. So you would have a universe in which there were certain laws that, say, X-rays obeyed, and any time you did an experiment on X-rays, they would obey these laws until they started to threaten a life form, and then they would obey totally different laws, right? The X-ray heading over my shoulder goes in a nice straight line according to the laws of nature. The one that's headed towards my DNA to cause cancer suddenly just takes a right-hand turn and obeys some other laws for no reason. It seems to me much more likely that God would just create a consistent universe in the first place, in which case we would find a universe with consistent laws and constants that allowed life. It speaks to God having thought this thing out from the beginning and not going, oh, I've made a universe that can't actually do any of the things I wanted. I'll just stick life in it anyway.
I've long thought that objection is incoherent. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense because you're kind of denying that there are any laws of nature in the first place. Well, the interesting thing is,
I had a chance to talk to, there's an interview me and Sean are on, Sean Carroll are on Unbelievable. And I got a chance to ask him about this. So in particular, make this objection. He can't make this objection because of his view of the laws of nature. So Sean Carroll can't make this objection for the following reason. What do you think a law of nature is? So if you think it's like the law of nature that about electrons is just sort of something that controls how electrons move, then it's entirely possible that the laws of nature are one way. There's the thing that the electron wants to do, and then the way the universe actually behaves is another way. So the electron, which is heading towards my head, suddenly takes a right-angled turn. So the laws said, hit Luke in the head, and then the universe behaves another way. Sean's what's called a Humean, and it's actually quite a popular view. The laws of nature just are the most concise description of the universe that we can manage, that we can discover. And so if that's your view of the laws of nature, it cannot be the case that the laws of nature are one way and the way the universe behaves is another way. That's not possible. It must be the case. The laws of nature just are about the way the universe behaves. That's all there is. So there's a worry there in him, in any Humean.
Yeah,
presenting
I've thought that exact same thing. All right, here's another question from What is Face for? What's okay? I'm not gonna try. Disease and natural disaster are examples of the universe not being fine-tuned for life.
No, they aren't, because that's not relevant in the slightest. I mean, so there are certain objections which are good and which you have to sort of deal with and sort of arise naturally, and then there are some which just show that you don't understand what the argument is. When I say the universe is fine-tuned for life, I'm not saying it's perfect or optimal or ideal in any sense at all. Okay, so I'm not saying that, things down here are a picnic, therefore God exists. That's just not the argument at all. The argument is, fine-tuned means that in this arena of let's look at the constants of nature and see whether there's anything interesting about our universe, the set of universes in that arena which can permit the existence of life at all, and by that we really mean any sort of complexity, because we're using a very conservative criteria, as I mentioned. The set there is very small. And that's all that I mean, that can permit life at all. So the universe, disease and natural disaster are examples of the universe not being optimal for having as much life as possible, possibly. That seems likely. But given that the argument is not at all about life, how much life we can cram into the universe, it just doesn't matter. Again, throw this objection at the awesome theological argument. Suppose that this part of the sky over here spells out the first 14 verses, and there's another bit out of the sky over there which is just looks like the usual night sky. That bit doesn't spell anything. Is that a problem? Is that a problem for the argument? No, obviously not. Now, the argument from evil is a very serious problem, and in some sense, it's the counterpoint to, would I expect there to be this much disease and natural suffering in a universe if God was true? And so, in that case, it's a perfectly reasonable question. It's just not a counterexample to fine tuning. Fine tuning just doesn't mean that.
Wolf Heidegger says, easy question, but why not point at anything unlikely and say it has a designer, like playing card arrangements or chess games?
So run through the logic of the Bayesian logic here. So here's an example to illustrate the point, to illustrate the principle. This is not an analogy. Anyway, we're playing poker. I've used this a lot of times before, but hopefully you're not bored by it. We're playing poker, and anytime I deal the cards out, I get okay.
Start it over.
Just waiting for
you cut out a little bit.
And anytime, we're playing poker. And anytime I deal, I get a royal flush. I get the hand that instantly wins any hand of poker. Okay? And now you say, this is evidence that you are cheating. And you say, flesh that out. And you can flesh that out in the same sort of way you can flesh out the fine-tuning argument. The probability of that happening if you are not cheating is extremely low, and the probability of it if you are cheating is not extremely low, because the whole point of cheating is to win, and so giving yourself the hand that automatically wins is something you might do. You might not be as obvious about it, but never mind. You need those two things. It's not just the probability of one is low, but that the probability on the other one is not low. And in particular, this is something my friend Brendan Brewer constantly says to me, or has said on many occasions. Probabilities vary with the hypothesis. So remember, the data is the same, royal flushes. The hypothesis that I'm not cheating and the hypothesis that I am cheating, those are what generate the probabilities, and the probabilities change strongly based on those. So the question now is, okay, why not say anything unlikely that it has a designer? Well, because you have to have both of those things. So suppose I object that, any set of hands, suppose there's been 10 poker hands and I've got a royal flush every time. Any set of 10 poker hands is unlikely in exactly the same way that 10 royal flushes is unlikely. Why not say that, I can say, why not say that he over there who just has lost every hand, that he's cheating because his are unlikely in exactly the same way. It's not just the probability given that they're not cheating that is relevant, it's the other probability as well. So in this case, the reason why we focus on life is because life, a moral agent, embodied moral agents, is the kind of thing you might expect a God to create. So again, not that it's probable, just that it's not as ridiculously unlikely as it is on naturalism. That's all we need.
Okay, so here's another, this is not necessarily a question, and I think I might have actually lost it. Zooming down, I should be able to find it. Here it is. Sean Kelly says, he says indeterminism is
Right.
Indeterminism, the probability of the current universe is 1-to-1. Every particle follows natural law and nothing could have happened any other way.
False. Not true. On determinism, given the initial state of the universe and the laws and constants of nature, the later stages of the universe are completely set. Okay? So what is the probability that the universe would be like this today? On determinism, given the initial state of the universe and the deterministic laws of nature, including any constants that they need, the probability that a later stage in the universe will be this is 1. That's the probability that's 1. Okay? It is not the case that the universe had to be this way and couldn't have been any other way. Okay? It's a difference between... So we're exactly considering here other possible ways that the universe could have been, including other possible laws, other possible ways that the universe could have begun. So the fact that in determinism there is sort of an ironclad deterministic link between the laws and the initial conditions and then the final state of the universe. Okay, I'm getting it's back to front on my screen, so this is off-putting. Sorry, but let's put the initial on one. Okay, here's the start of the universe. I've decided it's over this side because I say so. Okay, here's the start of the universe. Here's the state of the universe today. Given the start of the universe, given the laws, if they're deterministic, there is a 1-to-1 and totally ironclad arrow that goes from the start to the way the universe is today. That's determinism. There's nothing in determinism that says that these cannot have been any other way. So that's not what determinism is. Unless I'll wait for myself to come back. Okay. There's nothing that says that the start of the universe and the laws of nature has to be this way unless you're doing a sort of metaphysical determinism. It's got to be above
determinism
the laws of
plus
nature.
Something else.
Even, you don't even really need determinism. It's not doing anything in that argument. You just need some metaphysical probability that says the start of the universe has to be like this and the laws have to be this. In that, if you've got that, then determinism will give you the rest of the history of the universe. But you need something to say that these must be the way that they are.
And that's not determinism.
That's not determinism. That's something else. And if you want to postulate that, that's fine. Go for it. Tell us what the principle is, and tell us how
modal collapse.
Modal. I'll leave that to philosophers. Go for it. The short story is. Again, throw this argument at the awesome theological argument. Maybe there is some law of nature and initial condition under which 13.8 billion years later, the first couple of chapters of John are written out in the night sky. Now, the thing about that is it is true that you could write down some law of nature in which you would write down, you would get the first 14 verses of John written out in the night sky. That's entirely possible. But that doesn't make that shouldn't derail the argument. That's a really bad objection. There is just it just happened because it must happen. Why did it have to happen? Oh, well, I have no idea. That's not a good objection.
Speaking of bad objections, here's one from David Dale. He says, I've heard atheists say assuming a 1 in a trillion occurrence has a divine origin is a logical fallacy because a 1 in a trillion can still happen by random chance. Explain and refute.
So the question here is not really what can you believe or what should you believe. So I can believe that if I see Bob over there, Bob's just dealt himself 10 royal flushes. I can, if I want to, believe that it was just random chance, that he is not cheating specifically.
You definitely can do that.
Yeah, you can believe that because it's not an impossible thing. The question is what you should believe. And in this case, as I was saying before, it's not just that the probability of a life-permitting universe is extremely low on naturalism. It's that it's not extremely low on theism. What matters is the ratio of those two probabilities. Right? It's not just that one is small. It's not even that the other one is big, like it's a half or 99 out of 100. It's just that one is much, much larger than the other. Okay, that's all it needs. And so when you've got a case where the probability of something we know is very small on one hypothesis but not small on another hypothesis, right? And also it's the case that these aren't jerry-rigged, ad hoc, a thrown-together hypothesis that are just sort of chucked together just to explain the data. If you've got that, then you've got a situation where the data is really promoting one ahead of the other. In that case, it's not a logical fallacy, it's just Bayesian probability theory.
Okay, I was going to ask a question from this guy. He seems to be trolling here, Sean. This guy, Sean Kelly. A lot of his comments are very surface level. Okay, here's one. What's the takeaway? Says, how can random chance cause anything? How does chance have any causal powers?
Yeah. I've tried to avoid. So I said, just like 30 seconds ago, Bob got those royal flushes by random chance. Actually, that's not. Let's avoid that terminology. He got it and was not cheating. That's all that really matters. Bob is not cheating. Bob dealt himself 10 royal flushes in a row. That's enough. We can just avoid chance. So yeah, chance isn't a cause of anything. You're quite correct. Chance doesn't have causal powers. I was quite careful to say before that when you have something like naturalism, which says there's just no deeper reason for the way the universe is this way rather than some other way, we treat that within probability theory as if it was just a random hypothesis. Not that it is, not that it's generating. Wait, sorry, my internet's. Again,
You're
apologies
back.
for my internet. It's having to go through the middle of the Earth, right, from the southern hemisphere. So it's not that there is anything stochastic there, anything random in the sense of like, I'm generating a handle and lots of things are coming out by random. I just mean here's an example. The digits of pi, 3.14159 ... Of the first 10 million digits of pi, how many of them are the digit 1? Now, to answer that precisely, I would have to calculate all the digits. Or I could just treat them as if they were random because they have properties of being random and say, all right, roughly 1 out of 10 of the digits are the digit 1. And so of the 10 million, there will be roughly 1 million ones in the first 10 million digits of pi. I can treat something that is not the digits of pi are not random. They are completely determined, right? They are right. They're not going to. They're not random in the sense that tomorrow pi might be 3.4789. Right? They're not random in any sense like that. But I can treat them as if they were random because they have the property of being, distributed in a certain way. Similarly, if you've got a what's called a non-informative theory, you treat it as if it was random in probability theory.
Okay, so from a question from John Beavers, says, I just got here and I'm watching from the beginning, so if this has been covered, just ignore. What do you say about the puddle analogy?
What do we say about the puddle analogy, Cameron? So Cameron and I and
Wade Tistammer.
Wade, that's the guy. I was going to struggle with his last name, so I didn't want to guess. Wade Warhammer. No, that's not it.
Warhammer.
It's a cool sounding last name. So Wade and I, we did like a podcast on, so an episode on this, so you can go watch that. The short story is, in the puddle analogy, there is a coincidence between the shape of a puddle, the shape of a hole in the ground, and the shape of the water that sits in that hole. Okay? Where am I? There I am. Okay? So in the way Douglas Adams has laid us out, the puddle notices this hole fits me really well. So there's the shape of the water and the shape of the hole, and they fit each other perfectly. And he thinks that this is due to design. The puddle thinks this is due to design. But actually, we know that given that water is a liquid, given that the hole is solid, and given that gravity will push the liquid down, it is always the case that a puddle, which has been sitting there for any reasonable amount of time, will be the same shape as the hole that it's in. So there's not really a coincidence between the shape of the puddle and the shape of the water and the shape of the hole. So in particular, what the puddle needs to realize is there's not really any such thing as the shape of water. There's no such thing as the shape of a certain amount of water. It takes on whatever shape you put it in. Let's try to apply that to the universe. The fine-tuning argument says that there is an interesting alignment between the properties of our universe in terms of the fundamental constants and the requirements that life has in order to be able to live in any universe. Is it the case that actually life could just exist in any old universe? So there's not really a coincidence here, right? There's not really any such thing as the requirements of life. Life will just turn up in whatever universe you stick it in here. So there's not really a coincidence here. No, that's not true. That life will not turn up if you have a universe. Whatever your definition of life will not turn up if you have a universe in which there is no matter, or in which every particle is surrounded by 10,000 light years of empty space. So in the puddle analogy, right? Given that ground is solid, water is a liquid, and gravity works, the coincidence is explained. Okay, if you want to apply this to the fine-tuning argument, here's what you need to produce. A thing that explains the coincidence. Wait for it. If you want to explain the puddle analogy, this is going to be hard to watch. Sorry, everyone. Hang on, I'm still frozen.
Yeah, there it is.
Yes. Okay. Good. Again. If you want to explain fine-tuning, you have to produce the equivalent, which is given something, it is inevitable that life will exist in any old universe. And if you know what that something is, then why don't you tell us? Because no one else has any idea. And when you've got that thing, then you can use the puddle analogy. And until such time, it's not analogous.
Yeah, so just a little bit more background. I did a video on the puddle analogy where I broke down 5 different interpretations of it and responded to those. And then Apologia, he's a atheist YouTuber. He did a response video to that. And then Luke and Wade and I responded to Apologia. And so that's, if you want to see more about the puddle analogy and some of the drama that happened there, you can go watch that. All right, here's our last question for tonight from Joshua Buzzard. He says, can you speak to the recent research which has shown that the universe might not be isotropic and that constants like the cosmological constant, may vary within our universe?
So this is referring to a recent paper. There's been efforts to try to measure whether the constants are in fact constant. So one of the ways you can do that is some of the constants, especially what's called the fine structure constant, have a lot of say as to how the orbits of electrons in atoms hold together. And when we observe the universe as astronomers, we see evidence of electrons jumping between those levels. They give us spectral lines. These are extremely important. So if there was a change in the fine structure constant, we might be able to see changes in the relationships between different spectral lines, the way this electron jumps in hydrogen versus that electron in carbon. And so there's been a lot of effort for the last, I wonder when it started, at least 2 decades. John Webb at the University of New South Wales and a bunch of other people, Michael Murphy at Swinburne University, there's a couple of Australians doing this, trying to look at whether there is good evidence that whether we could find out whether these constants are changing. This is just a standard part of testing any cosmological theory. If we find out that they're changing, then something about the standard model has to change, and that's great because we've made progress, right? The thing that we thought was a constant has to change into something dynamic, like a field. So recently there was a paper put out, and by recently I mean, I have it on my desktop, I mean the 17th of March, put out by someone who I assume is John Webb's student at the University of New South Wales, Michael, Polish surname, I'm going to say is Wilczynska, and a bunch of other people, John Barrow, who Barrow and Tipler is the book on fine-tuning and the anthropic principle, Bob Carswell at Cambridge, saying that they might have marginal evidence, having looked at the most distant things we can see in the universe, which are quasars. I think that's still true. It might be gamma ray bursts. Never mind. There might be some evidence from quasars that there is a change in the fine structure constant not with time, but with location. And the way that matters, whenever you look out distantly into the universe, you're of course looking backwards in time. So if you look out in different directions and you see that the fine structure constant is different, then it's possible that the
hang on, let me make it full screen. So if you need to stretch, there you
go. The constant is changing with time. If you look in one direction and compare it in the opposite direction, and there seems to be a change in different, so it's slightly bigger in this direction, slightly smaller in that direction, then you would interpret that as there's a change in the fine structure constant with position in the universe. So there's some sort of smooth transition from one side to the other. What they say is, in terms of change over time, there's no evidence for that. So you have a measurement and then you have the error bar on the measurement. And in this case, the error bar includes zero change, so no evidence there. But what they say is, with the new measurements, there is a prefer no change 3.7 sigma level. Sorry. What they say is, going over that again, I'm back. So what they conclude is that there is a marginal preference for a no change over a change. For change over no change at the 3.7 signal level. Anyway, interesting stuff. What this means in terms of the fine-tuning argument, as I've laid it out, is if this is true, then there must be some deeper theory out there in which what we thought was a constant is actually something that varies. So there's a deeper theory. Now, my wife in the background over there. What this means is, whenever we get a deeper theory of the universe, a better theory, one that describes the data more accurately, in this case, if there really is a change, then it would have to, explain. It would have to involve a change in the fine structure constant. If we get that, then we can pose a better little question. We can pose a little question 2.0. Right? I've said that the way this argument is set out is provisional. It just uses the best physics we have. If tomorrow we get better physics, then we go again. Right? We just try to, we take a look at this theory, we try to vary its constants, we see what happens. We'll be varying its constants anyway to see what happens, because that's how you test any theory. That's involved in testing any theory. So the short story is this will not have convinced a lot of people. I mean, it's marginal. There have been a lot of false starts in the past. There was a particular set of false starts where there was evidence claimed, and then later on, actually, Michael Murphy was one of the ones who showed that there was a very, very subtle instrumental effect. These are very difficult measurements to make. Any little thing in your instrument that you don't understand might cause a problem. So I don't think this is yet good evidence, but if we do get good evidence of varying constants, then we're just headed towards a deeper theory. We'll ask the fine-tuning argument again. There's no reason to expect, when we get a deeper theory, fine-tuning will go away, because it hasn't gone away thus far. So it would be pure presumption to say that this will solve fine-tuning and ruin the fine-tuning argument. But we'll go again. We'll keep doing physics. I'll keep looking at multiverse models. We'll keep thinking about theories in which, as John Barrow is doing, theories in which the fine structure constant varies. When we get better physics, when we get a better standard model, we'll ask the little question again and go from there. Until such time, the best handle we have on the big question is still the little question.
All right, I think that's going to do it for tonight. So I really appreciate you coming on the show today. I know it's like what is today for me? Tuesday? Is it Tuesday? Yeah, it is Tuesday.
It's just gone Wednesday. It's Wednesday.
Wednesday for you and Tuesday for me. Time differences are crazy. But yeah, I appreciate you coming on. And the next show that we have planned with Dr. Barnes is a review of Sean Carroll versus William Lane Craig. And that one is coming up on May 26th. So that'll be the 27th for Luke. But that's the next big thing that we have coming up with Dr. Barnes. And so if you are interested in that debate and a sort of review of it, and we also are going to have Dr. Aaron Wall. That's the first time that he'll be on the channel. And another guy named Ronald Cram. And so it's going to be a really great episode. We have a lot of cool stuff planned for that. So be on the lookout for that when we have that one up. But like I said, thanks for coming back on the show. It's been a pleasure. Maybe we can do something like this again in the future. Maybe another Q&A, or we can talk about your new book.
My wares, yeah. So this came out like a couple of weeks ago. And we haven't been able to do any of the talks we were planning. Well, we planned like 15 talks in the UK, and they all went under. So someone buy this.
Yeah. Let's do something on that, because you said that it was relevant to apologetics because it deals with the question of if the universe began to exist, the Big Bang, all that kind of stuff, right?
It's about the Big Bang model. We can then go on to ask. The book has a little bit about whether the Big Bang implies the beginning of the universe, but not too much. We just sort of more wanted to focus on the most, just the basic reasons why we believe the Big Bang theory is a good scientific theory. So. Yeah.
Well, we can. I mean, that'd be a good episode. So we'll definitely do that.
Again with Geraint Lewis. So.
Yeah, and the other book was a pleasure to read. So I'm assuming it's in the same vein, same kind of like comedic style. You're frozen. We sorry. And we're back. You're back.
We basically, stuff we find funny, we put in, and if other people find it funny, it's fine. There's actually a William Lane Craig reviewed the last book for Philosophia Christi, and he didn't particularly enjoy the humor, but I don't care. We're making ourselves laugh, and that's all that really matters.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks again for coming on, and we'll set up something soon. So let me just talk to you guys. If you've been enjoying the stuff that I've been putting out, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Also hit the little bell and turn on the notifications to all videos, so that way you can get notifications for when we post new videos. Turning on that bell is actually really important. It's probably more important than subscribers these days. So if you're subscribed and you haven't done the bell, please do that. It's going to help us out. And if you want to help us out even more and support the channel, go to patreon.com right below. Patreon.com. I'm doing this the wrong way. Patreon.com/Capturing Christianity is the way to support this ministry so that we can continue to put out cool videos like this. It's not possible. None of this is possible without your support. So if you want to help the ministry, help Capturing Christianity, make sure that it continues, and also support our next projects that we have coming up. Like, for example, we're launching a Spanish YouTube channel where we're going to be posting some of our interviews in Spanish with Spanish voiceover. Still working on that. And so if you want to support that, then patreon.com/capturingchristianity is the way to do it. And it's also linked in the description of the video. Super easy to do that. So with that, I'm going to, again, thank you guys for joining me today, and we'll see you guys later.